Are you losing money at the poker tables with Ace King, or just struggling to maximize your profits with this hand? If so, there's a good chance that you are playing Ace King wrong in multiple spots. This video will show you some of the most common mistakes that poker players make with Ace King, as well as exactly how to correct them. If you fully understand these tips, especially the one at the end of this video, you will begin printing money with Ace King. So coming in at number 5, we have not using the right amount of aggression. And there's really two different ways you can go wrong with this. Let's start with the more common one, which is players playing Ace King too passively pre-flop. And I've seen players flat with this hand in middle position when they had the opportunity to 3-bet and promote their position. In other words, to push out the button, take position in the hand, maybe win some pre-flop dead money or isolate against the original opener, a much cleaner line than what they were doing. I've also seen players sometimes limp call with this hand. This tends to be from like an older player that views Ace King as a drawing hand, that thinks a pair is always higher in strength than Ace King, not recognizing that Ace King has much better ability to improve post-flop, of course, than those pocket pairs, and also not realizing that Ace King is going to miss the flop roughly 2/3 of the time. So by limp calling, they lose the initiative in the hand. Often they miss the flop and they have to check fold or maybe peel one and then check fold the turn. Without the initiative, they're not able to make C-bets and double barrels that allow them to realize their equity and get some folds later in the hand. So this is clearly not profitable. I've also seen players play the hand too passively by cold calling 3-bets. So this is a big no-no, especially like from the blinds where you'll be out of position. If a player opens from middle position, say the button 3-bets, and you're in the small blind or big blind with Ace King, this is just a disaster to cold call here because you don't even know what the price is going to be for the flop. You don't know if the original opener is going to 4-bet you and you end up in no man's land. Even if he just calls, you're still out of position against two players, and it's a hand that plays fairly face up from this spot, and it's just not going to perform that well. You'd be much better off playing cold 4-bet or fold in this spot. Okay, so these are the players that are playing the hand too passively, but we can also play the hand too aggressively. There are times where pre-flop, the range that you were up against is just so strong that to re-raise over the top is much too risky. So let's take another example where an under-the-gun player who's fairly tight opens, and you have Ace King in the small blind. You decide to 3-bet to 4x, which is pretty standard, and now let's say the under-the-gun player 4-bets you. And again, this is a tight player, they don't get out of line too often, and if you had to guess, you'd assume that their 4-betting range is like kings, aces, Ace King suited, and maybe like one suited ace bluff like Ace 5 suited in this configuration against this player. So if you make those assumptions, why on earth would you jam over the top? And yet this is what I see so often. People just don't want to play this hand out of position, so they kind of panic. They think it's too good to fold, so they rip in 200 big blinds, and lo and behold, they're called by kings or aces, or once in a while Ace King suited, and like they chop, but like there's really not a whole lot that you're accomplishing by doing this. You're folding your opponent off his one bluff, which was Ace 5 suited, which you'd rather keep in the hand. Potentially on an ace high board, you can cooler him, or if it's a king high board, maybe he'll bluff off against you and you can win a big pot. But you're really just accomplishing nothing with this line. Another example would be post flop. If you open Ace King from early position, the pot ends up multi-way, and you get a board like the 7 of clubs, 6 of spades, 4 of clubs board. And I see people c-betting Ace King into this uphill battle of multiple people on an unfavorable board way, way too often. This is a spot where being aggressive with Ace King is really going to just bleed money, and you need to wave the white flag, save your capital for a better spot, and not play the hand so aggressively. So that segues into our next reason, which is not knowing when to bluff with this hand when you miss the board. Okay, so there are several factors we need to consider because we can't always just wave the white flag when we miss the board with Ace King. It's going to happen too often. Like we said, it's going to happen 2/3 of the time with this hand. So we need a really good game plan for when this happens. And some of the factors you'll want to consider, are you heads up or multi-way? Of course, if you're heads up, you're going to c-bet with this hand much more often than if you're multi-way and the board is unfavorable. You'll also want to look at the board texture because not all boards are created equally when you miss the flop. You may get a board like 10 of spades, jack of spades, and like a 4 of diamonds when, say, you have the ace of spades in your hand with an offsuit king. Okay, so this is a spot where you have pretty decent equity and you have a barreling plan if there's a spade completer on the turn or the river. This might be a board to follow through with a c-bet and plan to double barrel. In contrast, you may get a board like we mentioned earlier, like the 7 of clubs, 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts, which is just completely hopeless. And if you're out of position against players that have a lot of the sets in their range, they can have 2 pair here. It's just not a board to be bluffing uphill with. It's much better to just check and give up. Now, we'll also want to consider what your preflop range was when deciding whether to bluff with this hand or not. So consider a situation where you open on the button and the big blind calls and we get some low board like a deuce, deuce, 3 board. Okay, so ace king could certainly bet this board, but it's a spot where ace king is actually kind of in the middle of your button opening range on this board. Okay, because you have a lot of worse hands, like say 9 high or 10 high that just have complete air, no showdown value. So sometimes ace king can go into a checking range if you'd like, and it can check back and sometimes call a turn bet, see if it improves, see if it can get to showdown without further action. And it can play better because your range was wider from here, and so ace king kind of falls in the middle and it could be in the checking range. Now take a different scenario though, where you're an under the gun opener. Somebody 3 bets and now you 4 bet with a reasonably tight range. And now we get a deuce, deuce, 3 flop. Okay, so the tables are completely turned because now on this board with your new range, you have a much tighter range and you don't have that many bluffs to use. You have big pairs like queens, kings, and aces to use here as your value, but what would you use as your bluffs? Maybe you have a couple suited aces, but ace king is going to be one of your prime bluffing hands in this configuration with a tighter range spot. So keeping that in mind, knowing that you need to bluff ace king more often when your range is super tight and you've missed the board, compared to when you have a wider range and ace king actually kind of falls in the middle of that and may actually have some showdown value. And lastly, of course, we always need to be considering who is our opponent, right? Because it may be a spot where theoretically ace king is our best bluff on this board, but if we know our opponent has like likely an overpair or ace king themselves and they aren't folding any of that range and they may even like jam raise over the top, it's not a spot to be running some sort of multi-barrel bluff against this player. On the other hand, if we have a tight opponent that we think we can fold off a medium overpair like a tens or a jacks, say in a 4-bet pot or a 3-bet pot, by the end, this could be a spot where we actually do go for it and we keep the pedal to the metal. And the most common blunder that we see players make with ace king is simply not finding mandatory folds once they've made the top pair. Okay, so ace king had to weave through this labyrinth of a flop where it misses 2/3 of the time. So sometimes we hit and we get to that 1/3 territory and it's so exciting that we finally made a pair with this hand, and then our opponent plays back at us with some extreme aggression. And some people just get so stubborn, they've missed the flop so many times that they're just unwilling to release it in this particular variation. Well, what you need to recognize, especially when you're up against a recreational player and you hit your top pair, top kicker on say an ace high board, is that if these players had ace king themselves, they would almost never fold to you. They don't expect you to fold here when they start to check raise and go crazy on these boards that are favorable for you. And subconsciously, they expect you to behave the same way they would. So what does that mean? They expect you to call on these boards and they expect you to pay them off because they likely have a big hand. These are exactly the spots where you need to find big folds. When you meet resistance on boards that appear favorable to you, that normally your opponents would be scared of, but this time they're playing back at you with a check raise on the flop and a big barrel on the turn. This is even worse on ace high boards compared to king high boards, because ace high boards, a lot of recreational players play all the suited aces and they even play a decent amount of offsuit aces. So they make a lot of 2-pair combos on a board like ace, 9, 3 rainbow. If you bet the flop and they check raise you, right off the bat, alarm bells should be going off that this player can easily have 2-pair or a set here. And then even if you call here, hoping that they slow down, hoping that maybe they're just overplaying like an ace 10 or an ace jack, if the turn comes a deuce and they fire in a big bet, it almost certainly removes those medium strength 1-pair hands at this point because they wouldn't play these hands so aggressively. So now they're representing a range that is either 2-pair or better, or they're bluffing. And we know the players under bluff this spot because they expect you to be strong. They're automatically putting you on ace king because that's how they hand read, and they're expecting you to call. And this is where you can save a lot of money and not give them the satisfaction. If they did have one bluff on this board, like an ace 9-3 rainbow board, perhaps they might use like a gut shot, like a 4-5 suited with a backdoor. And if we get a turn that looks innocuous on the surface, like a deuce that completes the rainbow, and they fire again, guess what? That just removed the one bluff in their range because that's now improved to a straight. These players would have to be much more creative with their bluffs in order for you to get curious about continuing to call down with this hand. Now, this is totally different against more experienced players, against people that are playing closer to equilibrium, that will find things like bottom pair to use as a bluff and other things. So you may have to continue against them, but against recreational players, we can find these exploitative folds. Another example could be a recreational player opening from early position, and you're under the gun one with, say, ace of diamonds, king of spades. You decide to 3-bet them, and they call. And we get a king of diamonds, jack of diamonds for a spades board. We're 200 big blinds deep. They check. We make a standard 1/3 pot c-bet, and now they check raise us to 4x. Okay, so this is the spot where we need to recognize that we hold the ace of diamonds, and a lot of our opponent's bluffs would have contained this card. It would have been things like the nut flush draw, for example, or like, a combo draw with this card. So when they check raise us here, there's a very good chance that they have a hand like pocket jacks, king jack suited, maybe even pocket fours if they were playing way too loose pre-flop. It's just a spot that's under bluffed. So even if we call here, we need to proceed with a lot of caution on the turn because it's a node where recreational players expect us to be calling, and therefore they expect to be making big paydays with their value hands. Say we do decide to call here, hoping that maybe they're overplaying ace-king themselves, or that they have king-queen, or the occasional like queen-10 suited, and we get a brick turn. Okay, and now say they make a slight overbet. So this is exactly the spot where we can save a ton of money and really boost our win rate. It's so unlikely that they're overplaying top pair at this point for an overbet size. Recreational players almost never overbet post-flop as a bluff. And it's almost certainly them just being greedy, trying to size up the stacks in such a way where they can get all in with their top two or their set against our hand. We can find a clear fold, especially holding the ace of diamonds in this spot. So that concludes the free portion.
If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Of this content. If you liked these 3 reasons, and if you found the information about Ace King valuable, the remaining 2 reasons for this video can be found in the PTO Poker Monthly membership. I know you will love it if you like this video. Check it out here. It's a great mix of private coaching, digital content, and a welcoming community that I know you will love. Lots of video content in there, including the top 2 mistakes that poker players make with Ace King. And hope to see you in there. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content just like this.